أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. اعلموا أيها الناس إن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها، وكل بدعة ضلالة، وكل ضلالة في النار. أعدني الله مني ومنكم. أيها الأحباب, today we gather, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. It's always good to be at Masjid Ar-Rahim with such a beautiful community. And as Sheikh Mukhtar let me know I was going to give the khutbah earlier in the week, he asked me to give the khutbah, and I thought to myself, what is something that the Muslims can do for one another at this blessed in the month of Sha'ban, as the month of Ramadan is upon us, that we can impose on one another, can remind one another of. And only one thing came to mind. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Fasting is prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those that came before you. And I thought to myself, before the month of Ramadan comes, what is a characteristic, a sifa, that a believer should encompass in its entirety to welcome the month of Ramadan? If the month of Ramadan is a rahmah min Allah to us, what can we take from rahmah and incorporate in our lives? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. I have not sent you except as a mercy to the believers. How then can us, the believers, Jama'at al-Muslimin, from wherever we're from, Senegal, Somalia, Oromia, Black American Muslims, white American Muslims, how can we work to create rahmah between us? It's enough that a person looks at the hadith of the Prophet, he says, مَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فِي تَوَادِّهِمْ وَتَرَاحُمِهِمْ وَتَعَاطُفِهِمْ مَثَلُ الْجَسَدِ الْوَاحِدِ إِذَا اشْتَكَى مِنْهُ عُضْوٌ تَدَاعَى لَهُ سَائِرُ الْجَسَدِ فِي السَّهْرِ وَالْحُمَّةِ. The example of the believer is that of one body. If a portion of that body is affected, the entire body is affected with what? Sickness, aches and fevers throughout the entirety of the night. This is the idea of the Muslim. You look at the Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim, the early community of the believers. You look at where they were from. You look at the stations in life they occupied. Of course you had among them the Shurafa, those of noble lineage, Abu Bakr and Uthman. And then you had among them those who were in the bottom tier of society, Bilal ibn Rabah, Zayd ibn Haritha, so on and so forth. This is an environment that before La ilaha illallah, people were divided by what? What clan you are from, what community you are from, how much money you have in the bank. And then La ilaha illallah came, and what happened? All of that went away. The Prophet ﷺ says the person who holds on to this, he's holding on to what? The ignorance of Jahiliyyah. So that now, the only thing that binds you and I together, today alhamdulillah, I'm with a community that is, I look into the room, I see West Africans, East Africans, I see Arabs, I see Desis. This is something that if you look around at Jama'at al-Nas, this is not very common in a lot of masajid. They have become ethnic hubs. You go to a masjid, they say this is the masjid of the Somalis. You go to a masjid, they say this is the masjid of the West Africans. And they tell you, okay, only Senegambians can come here. Only Ghanaians can pray here. This is not said out loud, but this is what? This is the underlying trend. But you look at the Prophet ﷺ, you look at his community. There were Habashis, Suhaib al-Rumi, Salman al-Farisi, those from Quraysh, those from Kinana, those from Tamim, so on and so forth. This was a rahmah for them. That communities can come together across languages, across ethnicities, and they can do what? They can remember the only thing that will matter on Yawm al-Qiyamah is those who are in what? Ahlul la ilaha illallah. Hum Hizbullah. They are the party of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the idea of rahmah, Ramadan is coming. It is a rahmah to us, but then ask yourself, do we embody rahmah baynana? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يَرْحَمْ صَغِيرَنَا وَيُوَقِّرْ كَبِيرَنَا. He is not from among us, the one that does not do what? Does not care for the poor and honor the elders. Care for the young rather and honor the elders. This is from the rahmah of what? La ilaha illallah. Because there was a time rather, where between the people there was no concept of rahmah. There was no concept of looking after your fellow men. And yet now we know that Islam, the manhaj of La ilaha illallah is a complete one. It guides us from every single aspect of life. How we interact with one another, how we look after the young, how we honor the old, how we do rahma baynana. And if the Prophet salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi, khayru khalqillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we said, inna asdaq al-hadithi kitabullah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's words, this is the best of speech. If He said, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, we have not sent you as but what? A blessing to all of mankind. Then ya jama'at al-nas, how do we look to enact rahma baynana? We look at the hadith. Do you feel the pain of your brother? Especially when Ramadan comes and we now know that there are people in our communities, they do not have sufficient food to break their fast. And Ramadan is coming and there are people in our own communities who do not have roof over their head. There are people in our communities who are suffering from a number of illnesses, of sicknesses, of diseases, the effects of COVID. And then we ask, where is the rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for us as all of these chaotic events are happening to us? But then we ask, are we people that are fostering rahmah between one another? Are we looking out for the Muslims? Are we looking out for our fellow brothers? Are we looking out for the young? Are we caring for the old? The Prophet salawatullahi wasalamu alayhi, example, his personhood, it was one centered around care for the weak and those who society tends to overlook. And a month like Ramadan, the month that is coming, the month of blessings, this is the entire purpose of that month. That we look beyond ourselves and we ask, what does my brother need? What does my sister need? What do the young in my community need? What does my community need? There is no other manhaj, there's no other calling, there's no other faith tradition that puts at its heart the idea of rahmah. Right? When you look at the environment, at the waqi', the context, you have to remember, the Arabs of Jahiliyyah, there was some good in them, of course. They honored the guests, they knew the bounds and the ties of kinship were important. You look at them in other aspects, and they were some of the most cursed people. They would bury young girls alive. They would fight for centuries over conflict. Remember, they would go into blood feuds over things of minimal significance. And then you look at what Islam did to them. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, he said, we were the worst of people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did what for us? A'azzana Allahu bil Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He raised our rank by what? By the idea of Islam. Today, when you look out into this room, there is a community here that is forming, that is growing. I promise you, where you come from is important. The culture that you hail from is important. You should honor that. But remember, the only thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will use to elevate us is what? La ilaha illallah. And it's enough. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَرْفَعُ بِهَذَا الْقُرْآنِ أَقْوَامًا وَيَضَعُ بِهِ آخَرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the Qur'an and at large the deen of Islam to do what? To raise the ranks of some, and by others He what? He degrades them and debases them. On the basis of what, ya jama'ah? On their adherence to La ilaha illallah, their knowledge of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and their what? Their steadfastness in spreading the deen of Islam. That is the only guarantee that we have to do what? That can elevate us out of the ignorance of Jahiliyyah. And na'udhu billah, we're not Jahiliyyah now, but still you can see what? The effects of Jahiliyyah in all of us. Our stubborn adherence to tribal and ethnic and cultural ties. This is good. Like the Prophet says what? دَعِيهَا فَإِنَّهَا مُمْتِنَّةٌ. Leave off of this claiming I am this, I am that. Because he says what? It is filthy, it is rotting. There was a man who said, better that a man says, I have done such and such, than he says that what? My forefathers did such and such. Right? It's better that you create with your own two hands than you stick to some fairy tale, some fantasy of when you were great and powerful. When rahmah is between us, we can only begin to do that. But if we cannot see past these ethnic and cultural divisions, we will never be able to reach what? The tawahhud bi la ilaha illallah. Coming together on that phrase. وَأَقُولُ قَوْلِي هَذَا فَاسْتَغْفِرُوا لِي وَلَكُمْ اسْتَغْفِرُوهُ إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْغَفُورُ الرَّحِيمُ. Bismillah. Yani something important to consider, beloved sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in his personhood, his akhlaqiyat, his behaviors, his manners, his person, his persona, the sunnah that he left. Can you ask yourself, has there ever been a person in the history of mankind, yani it was past? Of course there have been famous throughout history, but when people say, okay, so and so, George Washington, Alexander the Great, I don't know, who are some greats in history, we appreciate them for their accomplishments, what they did, and that's it. We don't seek to emulate them in their character from the beginning to the end. The only person whose entire personhood has, long after his death, how many years, rather how many centuries have passed after the death of the Prophet ﷺ? 14. And yet today, all of us, we strive to do what? We strive to emulate him. We eat the way he ate. We walk the way he walked. We desire to talk. We look to incorporate all of the smallest things, from the way that he slept to the way that he stood, into our everyday lives. Person in history, from the beginning of mankind until now, has had that honor. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, in him is what? The epitome. In him is what? The culmination, the zenith of the Bani Adam. He is the perfect man. All